You're asking me who I am? I'm a judge on the Harbor State Court of Appeals. And you just ordered me out of the car without even looking at my ID. With these words, the woman who was mistaken for another one caused the courtroom to freeze in deathly silence. The white officer claims he was following instructions. Suspicion, routine check, routine stop. Only here, in front of him was not just a woman, but one of the most respected figures in the judicial system. His version is clear, polished, until records, documents, and the whole history of those he has already stopped before her surface. Who is Justine Mason? And why does her silence speak louder than any accusation? This is not a story about revenge, but about how one woman, without raising her voice, broke the usual system, and how one voice, calm, firm, can become an echo for thousands of others. Get ready. We're about to begin. Evenings always began the same way in suburban Harbor City, the highway slowly fading, the streetlights lined up in a straight line, and the occasional car cutting through the dark streets like shadows on water. This evening was no exception. The air still held the residual warmth of the day, and a rare, stubborn sunset burned on the horizon. Judge Justine Mason drove with confidence. The car smelled of fresh leather, and a neatly folded black coat lay in the back seat. She had just returned from an awards ceremony at City Hall, receiving an award for her contributions to state judicial reform. People were standing and applauding, congratulating her, shaking her hand. She was reserved in her responses. She always was. Calm, thoughtful. Those who knew her said she's safe to be around because she doesn't make noise. She decides. The radio was playing jazz, but quietly, almost in the background. Thoughts were racing through Justine's head, about tomorrow's case, about her son who needed to be reminded about his grandmother's birthday, about the gardener who never showed up this week. And then, headlights behind. Blue lights. Signal. She didn't understand at first. Then she realized. And slowed down to the side of the road. The rearview mirror reflected an approaching silhouette. An officer. White skin. Young. A sharp stride. Nervous face. Not the type to smile. She turned off the music, took her papers out of the glove compartment, placed the judge's ID on her lap. She rolled down the window. "Good evening, officer," she said, looking straight ahead. He didn't answer. He came up to me, shining a flashlight into my face. He was catching my gaze. Not like a person, but like a scanner. "Get out of the car." "May I know the reason for the stop?" I said, "Get out of the car. Right now." Her heart skipped a beat. Not from fear. From surprise. She knew how such words should sound. She had read them from the protocols hundreds of times. This was not a standard test. "I have documents," she said calmly, holding out her hand. He didn't look. He pulled the door handle sharply, opened it, and made her take a step to the side. "Suspected theft. Car model and driver do not match description. Go to the hood. This is my car. I can show you." Hands on the hood. The cold metal burned. He didn't cuff her, he just stood there. But his grip was like a vice. Justine didn't resist. She knew every move could be used against her. She knew silence could speak louder. "Name? Justine Mason. Judge of the Tryon Appellate District. I'm returning from an official event. I have my ID in the back pocket of my bag." He said nothing. He walked over to her car. He opened the door and looked inside. Then he rummaged through the glove compartment. Then through his bag. She was silent. She knew that every word could be taken out of context. Every gesture could be interpreted as a threat. Across the street, a light came on in a window. Someone looked out. A shadow. The curtain moved. And then the light of a phone. Someone was filming. Justine noticed out of the corner of her eye but didn't show it. Only her breathing became slower. Deeper. Finally, the officer came up again. "Where did you get this car?" "I bought it. Here are the documents." "In the glove compartment. Inside the envelope." He opened them. "Read them." Froze. "You don't have an accent. I was born in this city." "Are you? Are you from Lincoln?" "Yes. Graduated from the state university. Then law school. And now I stand here. In front of you. In a dress after the ceremony with an award for honorable service and a chill down my spine from your words." He took a step back. "Perhaps I was wrong. You were not mistaken. You made a choice. Not to look at the documents. Not to hear the voice. You decided a black woman driving a good car is a theft. And you followed the script." The officer clenched his jaw. "You can file a complaint." "Oh, I will. But not for revenge. So that no woman after me will stand like this in silence, not knowing if anyone sees her pain." When she got back into the car, her hands were still shaking. Not from fear. From restraint. The radio was silent. The car seemed cramped. She looked in the mirror. There was no trace of emotion on her face, but there was a storm in her eyes. She turned on the engine. She drove slowly. She stopped at the red light at the intersection. And only then she exhaled. Deeply. Bitterly. The next morning, a video appeared on social media. A minute-long recording with the comment, "She just stood there. And he." The first 100 views were from friends. Then 1,000. Then 10,000. Justine Mason's name has become known beyond legal circles. But she was still silent. She knew, for now, silence. Then the law. And then the truth. The morning began with a familiar sound, the quiet hum of the coffee machine, the rustle of papers on the table, the muffled hum from the window. The life of Harbor City was waking up. Justine stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee, but the cup trembled in her hand. Not from fear, from fury packaged in icy calm. Emotions had no power over her, but her body still remembered the cold of the hood, the sharp commands, the feeling, "I am seen not as a judge, not as a citizen, just as a silhouette not fitting the pattern." The phone vibrated almost constantly. Messages, emails, notifications. The video shot by the neighbor had spread. It was already on the local news. It was reposted by lawyers, activists, students. The headlines ranged from "female judge humiliated by police officer" to "and even the law doesn't protect those who enforce it." She was in no hurry to react. For now, she was just watching. As always, first understand the essence, then choose the moment. The power of silence is not that it is weak. It is that it chooses when to speak. 2 hours later, she walked into the appeals court building. An ordinary day, an ordinary file, ordinary colleagues, but the looks were already different. Some nodded respectfully. Some avoided her gaze. Some looked with concern. "Are you really going to do this? Are you going to go against the system of which you are a part?" Her office was bright and formal. On the wall was her diploma and a framed photo of her and her son. On the desk was a folder with her file, a summons to the disciplinary committee, and a copy of her formal complaint to the Harbor City Police Department. She served it that same morning. It all started with a formal response: "Your application has been accepted for consideration. We will begin an internal investigation." Standard wording. Empty. No address, no tone, no remorse. But Justine had a name. And she had a face. And she had a job. So when a reporter from a local station left a message, "Ms. Mason, we have confirmed that you are the person involved in the incident that has gone viral. Are you available for an interview?" she replied, "No, not yet." Because I knew that words are important not only for what they say, but also for when they are said. Meanwhile, the police department was not silent either. A name had been leaked, unofficially: Officer David Lawson. Young. For years on the force. Previous complaints, but none had reached the level of formal investigation. His commanding officer, Captain Reed, was trying to smooth things over. Internal memos said press exposure needs to be limited while investigation is ongoing. But this was not a story that could be hushed up. 2 days later, Justine was approached by a colleague, Judge Ray Hemsworth. "Do you understand what you're doing?" "Yes. It can hit you. You're not just a person. You're an institution." "I know." Some of the commissioners are already nervous. They don't like noise, especially when it's inside the house. Justine looked straight ahead. "So we have become accustomed to the silence in which the system rots?" He remained silent. "I'm not taking revenge. I'm defending my right not to remain silent when my dignity is violated. If even a judge is obliged to tolerate such treatment, then an ordinary person has no chance." Her statement took hold. Officer Lawson was suspended. No formal charges, but no full exoneration. The media cautiously picked up the story. CNN, then NPR, then the New York Times. A front-page column: "If this happens to her, what's in store for us?" There were no protests. There were no marches. There were no slogans. But there was movement. In letters. In messages. In personal stories shared by women strangers. "I was stopped the same way in July. I was with my daughter. I was silent. Now no more. I am not a judge. But now I know I am not alone." A week later, Justine returned home later than usual. There was a bouquet on her porch. No signature. Inside was a note. "Thank you for being the silence that became a voice." She didn't smile. She put the flowers in the water, sat down in a chair by the window, and opened her laptop. There were dozens of letters in the folder. One was from a young law student. He wrote, "I studied to be a prosecutor so that one day I could prosecute. But after your story, I realized that I want to defend. I never thought that justice is such a fragile thing." Justine closed the letter and turned off the light. Her silence was no longer loneliness. It became an echo. By mid-month, the story was no longer just an incident. It was a period, a time marker, an event to which conversations, articles, arguments, and changes were attached. No longer did they say, this happened to the judge, but this is like Mason. The word became a marker, a turning point, and Justine still came to court every day. She didn't change her schedule, didn't change her rhythm. She continued to listen to cases, make decisions, work in her severity. But another feeling settled inside her. It didn't interfere, it straightened her posture. The feeling that they were looking at her. Not with pity, with anticipation. She never dreamed of being a symbol. Symbols, she believed, were faceless. But she was alive, real, and tired. At some point, letters began to be left at her door. Some were printed with headings. Others were handwritten with crooked lines and coffee stains. One converted note read, "I'm a salesperson at a supermarket. I left my shift and was going home. They stopped me. They said, it's too late for someone like you. I kept quiet. And then I heard about you. And I realized I don't have to." Justine read them in the evening. Not all of them. Sometimes one at a time. Carefully, as if each line were a piece of glass. In a way, it was. The stories were poignant, and yet so recognizable. Meanwhile, Officer Lawson made his first public appearance. In a short video statement filmed against a neutral background, he said, "I understand how this appears. And I am truly sorry if my actions caused any misunderstanding. I followed protocol. And I am prepared to cooperate with the investigation." The words were measured, soft, safe, but inside them there was emptiness. No personal responsibility. No recognition. No sense of what had been done wrong. The media picked up on the statement with headlines like, "Lawson explains." But the comments were different. "He's afraid. But he's unrepentant." Justine's colleagues split up. Some remained silent. They had gotten used to the silence. Others began to approach. Cautiously. With questions. With support. "Justine, are you sure you want to go all the way?" "I didn't walk. I just stood." This could set a dangerous precedent. Not for me. For them. One evening after a hearing, she was stopped by a woman at the exit of the courthouse. She was wearing glasses and holding a folder. "Excuse me. I'm Karen Holt. I teach at Harbor City University Law School. Do you have a minute?" "In short, yes. We're organizing a lecture. An internal one. For students only. About law, about race, about systemic errors. We'd like you to speak." "I'm not an activist. You are a judge who remained herself even under pressure. We don't need a slogan. We need living testimony." Justine thought, "I'll think about it. But only on one condition." "Which one?" "No camera. No slogans. Just students. Just honest conversation." Karen nodded. A few days later, about 40 students gathered in a small lecture hall at the faculty. No one took pictures. No one shouted. Everyone simply listened. Justine came out without folders, without paper. She just sat down in front of them. "I didn't come to inspire. I came to warn. Being in the system doesn't mean being blind. Defending the law doesn't mean justifying its abuse. And if you one day become prosecutors, lawyers, judges, you will encounter things that don't fit into the rules. Things that aren't described in textbooks. Things that will hurt. But if you remain silent, you are complicit." One of the students asked, "What did you feel when you were stopped?" "I felt that I had no right to emotion. Because any emotion would be assessed as aggression. I felt that my 20 years of service were nothing. Because the color of my skin said everything for me. But I also felt that if I remained silent, the next woman who was stopped would not be a judge. And she would have nothing to rely on." After the lecture, there was no applause. But as she was leaving the auditorium, one student in glasses with a green badge said, "Thank you for not being a heroine, but a human being." Meanwhile, the investigation was gathering momentum. Officer Lawson was presented with a list of previous complaints, none of which had been brought to a disciplinary hearing. Suddenly, details emerged: aggressive behavior, abuse of authority, disregard for protocol. All in different cases. But now they were one. The commission requested a personal meeting with Justine. She came, unaccompanied, without lawyers. "Ms. Mason, we don't want this case to undermine confidence in the system. Trust is not undermined by chance. It is undermined by the silence that follows it." "But you are a judge, a representative of the authorities." "Exactly. And if I remain silent, I will betray the very essence of my profession." The next morning, a drawing appeared on a wall in the city center, a silhouette of a woman standing with her back turned, and next to it the inscription, "They wanted her to be silent." But her silence became their shame. Justine saw him on her way to court. She stopped. She looked. No smile, no gesture. She simply nodded. She knew, a voice can be a whisper. But if it is heard, it changes a lot. It had been a tough summer in Harbor City. The heat was thick, there was an unnameable anxiety in the air, but it was felt by everyone. And as July approached its midpoint, what had started as a solitary affair had become a systemic crack. A public one. An inevitable one. The Judicial Commission, having collected materials on Officer David Lawson, could no longer brush it aside. 1 complaint is an accident. 2 are a coincidence. But 5 is a diagnosis. Hidden statements that went uninvestigated. Chamber complaints in the department. A complaint from a trainee fired a week after reporting. A letter from a woman whose complaint disappeared from the database. Now it was all on the surface. Justine read the reports alone. In her office. Under the lamp. With her morning coffee. She turned the pages not like a judge, but like someone who finally sees that her pain is not isolated. And it didn't make it easier. It made it worse. Because it meant the silence had gone on too long. Panic erupted within the police department. Lawson's commanding officer, Captain Reed, had suddenly resigned. Internal Affairs had requested the entire file. The city attorney had declared a structural culture overhaul was needed. But the announcement was too late. Too formal. Too late. There was silence in the streets. No rallies, no shouting. People did not come out with posters. But they did leave from the polling stations, from trust in the officers, from hope for protection. And Justine was silent. She did not comment on every news item. She did not appear on screens. She did not give headlines. She wrote. She prepared an internal conclusion, referring not to emotions but to facts, articles, figures. And the calmer her tone, the more destructive it sounded. One morning she received a call from the City Police Academy. Judge Mason, this is Instructor Terry Allen. Sorry to interrupt. We're discussing a revision of the training modules. We'd like to invite you to conduct an internal meeting. Not a lecture. A dialogue. She was silent for a second. Why me? Because you are respected. Even by those who disagree. Because you speak calmly. And that is what scares me the most. Justine thought. Okay. But on one condition. I'm listening. No camera. No press reports. Just you, your people, and open ears. She came into the academy hall in a gray jacket without jewelry, with a thin folder in her hand. There was tension on the cadets' faces. Among them were white, black, Latino, and Asian. But their looks had one thing in common, the fear of making a mistake. I'm not an enemy, she began. But I'm not a comforter either. I'm not here to tell you that you're doing well. I'm here so that you know what you're getting into. She wasn't talking about politics. About boundaries that can't be crossed. About moments when the law becomes a shield not to protect people but to protect power. She didn't accuse. She explained. Every time you say it's just protocol, you kill personal responsibility. Every time you don't ask yourself why, you build a system that you will one day fall victim to. The law is not armor. It is a mirror. And if you don't want to look into it, you will break it. Yourself. One of the cadets asked, have you ever thought that all this is useless? That the system does not change? Of course, she said. But then I remember that each protocol has a human name on it. And that means it can be rewritten. A week later, Lawson was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The press was not allowed. But the information leaked. He partially admitted guilt, poor interpretation of the protocol, emotional stress, human error. Everything except an apology. Not a single word to Justine. The commission's decision stated, violations incompatible with further service. He was dismissed. Justine read the headline online. Closed her laptop. And felt nothing. No satisfaction. No joy. Just silence. Because this wasn't the end. Just the first act. A few days later, she received an invitation to a closed meeting with the city council. The topic was the launch of a program on human rights and interracial ethics in the justice system. They suggested naming it after her. She refused. It's not my name that's important. It's important that there is a program for those whose names are not asked. One evening, returning home, she noticed a man at her door. Tall, wearing glasses, holding an old camera. He was embarrassed to see her. Sorry. I wanted to pass it on. I was there. That night, I took the picture. I didn't know if it would be useful. But he pulled out a photograph. Black and white. Her silhouette in the headlights standing by the hood. Straight back. Outstretched documents. Face half turned. She is wordless but louder than a scream. This is not a frame. This is a monument, he said. Justine looked. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. The next morning, the City Hall published a plan for reform, mandatory courses, an independent commission, a transparent complaints system. Her name was not there, but her footprint was there. Because sometimes you don't need to be on the flag. It's enough to stand in the dark when no one expects you to stay. Almost half a year has passed. Harbor City was no longer buzzing with headlines. The story of Officer Lawson had dropped from the top news, giving way to new reasons. But the streets were a little quieter. There were now signs at intersections, recording of stops as mandatory. At the precincts, a new column appeared in the reports, evaluation of interaction with the citizen. Small, unadvertised, but real changes. Justine didn't talk about herself. She still showed up to court on time, held herself straight, and spoke clearly. In the courtroom, her voice was as steady as ever. But now it carried more than just legal weight. Now it carried a living story. In November, she was offered the position of advisor to the new Human Rights Monitoring Commission at the Municipal Council. Not a politician. Not a face. Just someone who directs, checks, and speaks when everyone else is silent. She accepted. The first thing she did was introduce a clause: each decision of the commission must be published in full. Without editing. Without cuts. Transparency is not in the reports, she said. It's in the fact that no one asks, what did you actually decide? The Legal Support Center, initiated by a group of lawyers after her story, was now called Site 29. The name was taken from the street number where she was stopped. No names. No heroes. Just a number. As a reminder. They suggested naming it after her. She refused. The place should be about everyone, she said, and not about the one who suffered the loudest. In the winter, Justine agreed to speak at Lakeridge University at a public lecture. The stage was simple: a wooden lectern, rows of students, and a silence in which you could even hear the movement of fingers on the pages of a notebook. I wasn't fighting to win, she said. I just decided one day not to swallow something I shouldn't have. We're so used to suppressed anger, to polite humiliation, that we don't even notice when we stop breathing. But breathing is a right. And if it's taken away from you, speak up. One student raised his hand. How did you cope? I'm not alone. There were those who didn't betray me. And I didn't allow myself to betray myself. And how to live after? She smiled slightly. Don't expect gratitude. And remember that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's a target. On Christmas Eve, she received a letter. An ordinary envelope, no return address. Inside, a neat, uneven sheet of paper. A child's handwriting. I don't know your name, but my mother said that you protected us all. I'm not afraid now. Thank you for not keeping silent. Justine put the letter in the drawer. Then she took out the rest, dozens of letters, notes, postcards. Each one a trace, and each one more than applause. One January evening, she returned home later than usual. It was dark outside, the air was cold but crisp. She stopped at her porch and looked up. Above the entrance, where there had once been a regular lantern, there was now a sign, unofficial but firmly nailed. You gave a voice to those who were used to being silent. You didn't shout, but we were heard. In the spring, she was invited to a reunion of graduates from the college where she studied. A collage was made on a stand with photographs of graduates. Among them was her photo. She is in a gown, looking into the camera, holding not a diploma but a copy of the Constitution. Under the photograph was the caption: Justice is not always a loud step. Sometimes it is a clear stop and a firm no. She came alone that day. Without an escort. Without assistance. She stopped at the photo. She looked at it. And smiled without pride. Without pathos. Simply with the feeling that everything was not in vain. Late in the evening she returned home, made tea, sat by the window. On her knees was a book. Open but not read. Behind the glass was a lantern, in the light of which thin threads of rain fell. The phone was switched off. The news was muted. But she knew her voice was still there. Not on the microphone. Not on the air. But in the new laws. In the eyes of the students. In the actions of the police, who will now think twice before crossing the line. She didn't win. She didn't take revenge. She remained herself. And that was enough. Share your opinion about this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you don't miss new stories.